wee bit of an overview of what we've been doing over the past few weeks. I just give a little tiny bit of a background to Aok Galson. I don't want to assume that everybody knows exactly what we are. Aok Galson is Galson Estate Trust. That's Gaelic for Galson Estate Trust. And the trust owns a 56,000 acre estate that covers much of the northwest of the Isle of Lewis. The estate was purchased by the community in 2007, so in many ways we're probably one of the older buyouts. We have 22 villages on the estate and around 1,900 residents, so it's quite a big estate, and lots of different makeup of people, a wide range of people that live there and work there. So that's a wee bit of the background. The trust have been involved in lots of projects over the years, but I think maybe none quite as challenging as the situation we currently find ourselves in. So really and truly, I think when I was asked to do a case study and to speak a little bit about some of the things that we're involved in, I sat down and wanted to think about, well, why did we respond in the way that we responded? And I think for Aok Galson, and I'm sure the same with most, if not all, community land trusts, will be that we're not simply land trusts. We're community land trusts. We manage assets, and the people asset is probably one of the most critical parts of our asset base. The community have supported the trust as an organisation through the good times and the bad, and I'm sure many of you will know that we are no strangers to crisis. We lost our beautiful business centre early last year and are still in the business recovery phase from that. So we've had our fair share of challenges over recent months. So this was our opportunity to get back and again support our community how we always would wish to through this difficult time. So soon as news broke really about the crisis, my own staff team and I really considered how we could practically support the community. We could see probably pretty quickly the way we thought things might go, having looked at what was happening in other parts of Europe, whereby the countries had already moved into a lockdown situation. So I guess the concern for us was really that we've got a very ageing population, and we are rural. We're a number of miles away from the main town. And whilst there's lots of resources and great facilities on the estate, we're still a long way from the main hospital in Stornoway. So we decided that it would be a really good idea to put some things in place that would allow people to help each other as much as possible, rather than us being the single point of contact, which could result in a bottleneck if things escalated. And at that point we didn't know where we might end up, and I guess in many ways we still don't. So we decided that it might be a good idea to try and establish networks and do that village by village. So we managed to encourage a couple of volunteers that we knew would be suitable and would be able to collate phone numbers, and not just mobile phone numbers for WhatsApp, but also where households didn't have WhatsApp or a mobile, we were recording a landline so that there was coverage for every household on the estate. So we've spent much of the last 6 weeks setting up those WhatsApp groups. They are functioning well, and people are using them to say, I'm going to the shop, does anybody need anything? They're picking up groceries for each other. So it's enabled lots of people to help other people in a neighbourly, mutual support type way, rather than it all being part of like I said, a bottleneck sort of service. We were pretty quickly asked by one of the surgeries on the estate if we would deliver prescriptions, and we had a member of staff who had been working on a household recycling centre that we manage on the estate, and our local authority had shut the centre, so we were able to redeploy a member of staff to start on these prescription deliveries. But it was a pretty mammoth task given the size and geography of the estate. So we now are in a position where we're doing that with volunteers, and we're delivering for the 2 surgeries on the estate. So we do that on a daily basis. So Monday to Friday, prescriptions will be delivered, and in some days we're talking over 100 prescriptions. So it can be a very busy job and a big commitment from our volunteers. So apart from that, we also have recognised that we're a crofting estate. We have over 600 crofts. We have lots of active crofters, and we are currently in lambing season. So just before this, we realised that this was going to be critical for some people to be able to access crofting supplies, animal medication, and so on. And our local crofting cooperative had to obviously shut their store and put a collection service in place. So people were able to telephone in their order, get an order number, and they were having to collect it on the same day. Now, we realised that was going to be an issue for a lot of people on the estate who were perhaps shielding or weren't able to get to Stornoway to collect items that swiftly. So we were able to secure a van from Car Hire Hebrides, a local company that had offered 2 communities vans, and we just had to pay for the insurance and so on. And we were able to put a collection service in place 3 days a week. So our redeployed member of staff does that, collects from the crofting cooperative 3 times a week and delivers back to the estate and delivers to 3 collection points. So these are 3 community car park areas where there's lots of space, and we can ensure we adhere to social distancing measures whilst doing that. I guess underpinning all of this as well, we at the same time as launching the WhatsApp groups, we put in place a private Facebook group, and that has been where we've been able to communicate with our volunteers. We've shared some guidance on there. If we need someone pretty promptly, we'll post something on there, and every time we've had volunteers come forward to be able to carry out either one-off jobs or something that's maybe a bit more of a commitment. So that's a great pool of volunteers, and in a space where we're able to share openly with trusted volunteers. Aside from that as well, I guess there's a few other things happening that are around the more social well-being aspect than the sort of physical things that we're doing. We are running book bug sessions 3 times a week on our YouTube channel that we set up a few weeks ago. So we run English and Gaelic sessions 3 times a week, and we also have an online gentle exercise class. So these things just allow people to engage. The Gaelic book bug is particularly important where perhaps children who are in Gaelic medium aren't having many opportunities to speak Gaelic if they're not in a Gaelic speaking household, and that just allows them to hear the language spoken. And also our Gaelic development officer is offering support to parents to be able to carry out work at home as well, because we realise the pressure that schools are under too, and we want to be able to support that as best we can. As well as that, we've assigned 1 member of staff to analyse the businesses and social enterprises organisations on the estate, and we've contacted 130 businesses or organisations to date with a direct email, offering them support or assistance should they require it, to try and ascertain what funding schemes might be available to them, what support is there for them. We've also analysed using sort of public data, the rateable value of properties and so on, to be able to categorise what we believe from the main support schemes people would be eligible for, and we've been able to share that with the Scotland's Islands team, who have used that to help them it's helped inform the new scheme that's due to open for businesses in hardship, and that'll open at the end of April. So we're really pleased that is that collaborative working is there, and we've been able to feed into that system that's been put in place. We're also currently just working on looking at an emergency fund. As a charity, our objectives don't allow us to support individuals, so we've been approached by another organisation, and we are very hopeful that we will be able to support them to administer a fund that would allow them to support individuals through a hardship fund. So we're working on that, and we're also working on securing some funding for a house numbering project. I'm sure anybody who's visited the islands knows that sometimes it can be quite a daunting prospect trying to find an address. It's sometimes quite illogical numbering and inconsistent. So we would hope that we can put some house numbers in place through a project over coming months as well, because we realise that's important for emergency services and deliveries, and that has become even more apparent for us since we started delivering prescriptions and so on ourselves. So really and truly, I think there are many positives and many opportunities for learning throughout all of this, and it changes. It's an evolving situation. It changes all the time, and we have to be open to moving with those changes. But I think the key thing for me has been that communities really don't need led. Communities can lead by themselves if they're supported. They can put often the best solutions in place at a grassroots level. They just need the adequate space to be able to do that, and not have things enforced or pushed upon them. I think if they have the adequate space, resources, they'll find the appropriate solutions for themselves and are willing to collaborate, just so long as they're involved in the engineering and the planning behind solutions and it's not dictated to them. So I think overall it's been positive. We've had lots of good feedback, and I think we're just trying to remain as open as possible to see where else we can support the community. And that's not to say that we say yes to everything that's asked of us. Some things don't make sense when we've weighed them up. But the things that have, hopefully, are the things that are valued and that are making a difference through a difficult time. Okay, I think that's me.
Okay, thank you, Lisa. That's great, really interesting. And we're going to hear a very different perspective now from a very different place. We're going to hear from Martin from Kinning Park Complex talking about the work that they've been doing in Glasgow.
Hiya, folks. You first of all, you think, how do you follow somebody like Galson? What a job. And then you understand that actually probably would be an even more difficult job if we didn't have people like Galson to follow, because they have been beating a path for a number of years ahead of a lot of other folks. So yeah, thanks very much, Lisa. That was inspirational. We've got a couple of our team watching here just now, and I'm sure that there are some ideas that we'll take away from that as well. To give a little bit of context about the Kinning Park complex, obviously we've mentioned that the Kinning Park complex is based in Glasgow, so it's a very different situation, a very different community that we serve. We're based within the G41, or straddle the G41 and G51 postcodes. I don't know if you can see the screen just now, Lindsay, that I'm sharing. Do you see the PowerPoint? And so thanks, Lisa. And so we are based near Ibrox football stadium, for anybody who's come down for Glasgow there. It's within the Greater Govan ward, within the neighbourhood of Kinning Park, which is a neighbourhood which was mostly bulldozed for the M8 coming through in the 70s. And so we serve a corridor which runs along the Paisley Road West in Glasgow. It's part of the Greater Govan electoral ward, the G51 postcode. It's a pretty diverse postcode, both in terms of socio-economic backgrounds of the folks that live in it, but also within the sort of ethnic backgrounds of the folks that live in it. It's always been a place with a higher than average level of folks who weren't born originally in Scotland. And it also serves a community which is the initial reception centre for everybody in Glasgow who comes within the asylum process. So anybody who's coming to Scotland to seek refuge will be initially housed within the G51 area before being moved on to somewhere else in Glasgow. We manage a building rather than a 56,000 acre estate. Our building seems large compared to other community buildings in Glasgow, but compared to 56,000 acres, it's slightly smaller. And so we were built originally as a school in 1916. It was then a community centre from 1976. And in 1996, there was an occupation which saved it from closure. The building itself, although it's been community managed since 1996, was only purchased in 2019. And we're set up as a membership SCIO, so a membership organisation as opposed to a trust status. Generally, what we do is rent out the spaces that are in our studio, in our building, both in terms of the halls for events and classes and also for studios and offices. And that really gives the money for the organisation to survive. We also run a number of community projects, which mostly come through our community cafe and our volunteer programme. A lot of what we do is facilitate the space for others. However, we do have goals through the community cafe, which are about addressing inequality within the neighbourhood and also about tackling social isolation. So way back, however long it was ago, at the end of March, when it really looked like, the lockdown was only going to go in one direction, we made the decision that we wanted to shift the cafe from being a physical service to something that was delivered remotely. But the fact that most of the staff were either involved in a project which was about making sure everybody in our neighbourhood was fed and making sure that we were taking steps to reduce social isolation, meant that we were quite easily able to deploy the staff team to work towards a new project. Also, our building was already closed. We're just about to go through a major renovation and hopefully expansion of the building, which is paused at the moment, but also meant that we weren't due to bring any income in for the next 12 months. So the fact that we had this space operationally meant that we were able to kind of redesign our services pretty quickly. And what we came up with was the Aok Project. We'd seen that there was a lot of chat around the idea of random acts of kindness being something that would get us through this. But what we really wanted to say was actually what we need is organised, so acts of organised kindness. And that's what the Aok Project does. And so, we've refined the aim slightly over the last couple of weeks, but more or less what we're trying to do is to ensure that our communities are empowered to look after themselves and each other, because very much like Lisa was saying, we think that the most sustainable solutions are ones which are designed and delivered by the communities themselves. We want to make sure that everybody has access to the goods and the services and the support that they need, and we want to ensure that our communities are connected during this time. In terms of the communities being empowered to look after each other, we are a community of around 12,000 people across a couple of miles. So obviously a much higher population density than on the Galson Estate. But one of the challenges in the urban situation is that people are often quite removed from their neighbours. So we want to make sure that we're creating connections between neighbours and that those neighbours are the ones that are looking out for each other. We obviously, like many other projects, especially in urban areas, want to make sure that everyone has access to healthy and nutritious food, and that we want to make sure that we all come together to design and deliver the solutions that are needed. In terms of making sure that the communities have access to the goods and services they need, what we're talking there is that we're checking in on people and make sure that we're doing whatever we can to help, that we're working with others to ensure that people get the support that they need, and that we're helping people take steps to look after their health. And in terms of the communities being connected, what we mean is that the communities are supported to be in connection with each other, that we're providing access to education and culture, and that we're also sharing good stories of hope and solidarity, so that we're giving something for people to be inspired by at what can be quite a challenging time. In terms of what that means for project activities, we have divided our project up in 3 teams. We've got the empowerment team, and their jobs are mostly making sure that we're delivering meal boxes or groceries boxes to folks within the local area. And for folks who don't, for whatever reason, have the ability or the access to the equipment needed to be able to cook, that there's cooked meals being delivered as well. We are setting up volunteering teams, and at the moment that might be anything from sewing masks so that we can distribute masks through the local shops in the area, to delivering the flyers, and also new requests for support coming up, folks that need their dog walked because they're shielding, or folks who would really like to get out and spend a bit of time outside in their garden, but they are unable to do what's needed to make their garden safe and enjoyable to be in. And I think the next step for us is setting up neighbourhood groups, very much on the the same way that Lisa was describing, except we probably do tenement block by tenement block and street by street rather than village by village. A lot of what we do is driven by the needs which are uncovered by our support team. So the support team have a twin track service. One is a check-in service, and so that's sort of usually twice a week, but for some people a little bit more frequently, for some people a little bit less frequently, just checking in on folks, making sure that everything's okay and they've got everything that they need. And a catch-up service, which is a bit more of an in-depth social conversation. There's also referrals, both to and from other service providers. So what we're finding is that some of the folks that are delivering a citywide service are quickly becoming swamped. So we are trying to take on referrals from health and social care organisations or from other community groups who are citywide, so that we can support their service users that are in our neighbourhood, but also at times at which we are able to refer people on. We've got a system of support workers, which is more or less headed by one of our staff, but also supported by a mental health nurse. And so we're able to kind of assess people's needs through that. And as those needs become a little bit more acute, move that up from being experienced support workers who are used to providing befriending and online telephone support up to the mental health nurse, Kevin. And then in cases where people need a bit more support or other measures of support, we're able to refer them on. And very much like Lisa was mentioning with the gentle exercise class, we're also trying to provide people with tools for their mental and physical health. The connection team, again, is just about ensuring that there's connections between everybody in the community. So we've got a cafe connections programme, which is taking the kind of connections and conversations that were happening around the cafe and around the crafts table in the cafe online and supporting people to be able to access them, because obviously digital connectivity and accessibility is not the same across the board. So we're trying to make sure that we're creating small groups of people that can come together, either with new folks or folks that they were used to meeting before, to make sure that they've still got a form of social connection during this time of social distancing. And I think one thing that's been really important as well is having a well-developed communications plan, not only to keep the volunteers and keep the members of the organisations updated, but to try and make sure that all the different stakeholders for our organisation can understand what's going on and what we're doing as well, and trying to share as much as possible the fact that we believe community organisations that are well resourced and have a diverse and strong asset base, like Lisa was mentioning, are really well placed to respond to the current challenges. I think, some of the current reach, we have got around 80 people, although this is jumping up every day. I think it's already up to about 90 folks who are receiving regular support. So that means that they're receiving, a number of phone calls during the week, that they're receiving cooked meals, or they're receiving grocery boxes because they're, for either accessibility reasons or health reasons or economic reasons, aren't able to purchase the food that they need at the moment. I thought it was 70 plus volunteers, but we've had 100 plus local folks signing up in the last few weeks as volunteers. One of the big challenges actually in an urban area is how you engage with the folks that are in their community. So usually putting flyers through the letterbox is something that's really expensive. It's not just a case of trying to get the flyers designed and printed, but just the physical task of getting them out there and getting into the tenement closes has been difficult. So we've done we're on the end of our second flyer run, and we'll be starting our third, which is delivering flyers to, I think it's around 12,000 households. In the last few weeks, we've delivered about 600 kilos of food, and that's the equivalent of over 1,000 meals. And I think some of the current challenges are evident, but I think some of the current successes, if it's right to call it that, is that we've been able to engage with people in a way in the neighbourhood that we never have done before. So there's 20 odd years of history in our neighbourhood of the Kinning Park complex, but the building isn't always known to everybody within the local community, or it wasn't. And I think that's something that we're trying to encourage changing, not just in our neighbourhood, but across Glasgow. What we've seen is that there's many more people approaching their community organisations to say, how can we help? And so what we're trying to do is to encourage people to make those connections and make themselves aware of what's happening in local communities, because there are organisations like Kinning Park Complex or Galson or so many other members of Community Land Scotland who've been working to improve the financial, the social, the physical and mental well-being and resilience within their communities, and that's something which is even more important at this time. The way that we feel is that none of the challenges that we're facing at the moment, outside of the challenges related to public health, are new. You know, it's still about poverty, it's still about inequality, it's still about health, it's still about resilience, and that's just more acute than it's ever been. What we definitely feel has changed is that it's more obvious how we can tackle these challenges, which is by getting everybody in the community to participate in responses which are led and facilitated by strong community organisations, working in partnership with colleagues within the public sector as well. So it's, for us, it's been a busy time and a time at which it's kind of reaffirmed why we do what we do, and we've got a great camaraderie within the team, and it's something that we all feel really lucky to be part of. That's me, I think, Lindsay.
Okay, that's great. Thanks, Martin. We've got one question coming on the Q&A, so I'll direct that to both of you just now while our audience maybe comes up with some questions that they can post in the chat box. So the first question, which I'll direct to you first, Martin, since you're already on the screen, is from Claire, who's asking about how we change the perception of communities, because at the moment communities are perceived as being amateurs or troublemakers, but that we all know that communities have stepped up to the plate during this crisis. So how do we suppose get the word out about the role of communities, how important they are, and how they could have a place in future emergencies such as the climate emergency? I know that's something we talk about at Community Land Scotland quite a bit. So what's your view on that question, Martin?
Totally agree that there's a need for that. Dealing with the architects, for example, there's in our renovation project, and dealing with a whole load of other folks, there's definitely a feeling that I have that the word community is often used pejoratively and as a byword for things that are second rate and amateur, which is not the case when it comes to a lot of the members of Community Land Scotland. I think the way in which we change that perception is by stepping up to the plate at this time, and making it really obvious that actually we're delivering here solutions which are more efficient and more effective than in many other ways. And so continuing to do what we're doing and be a little bit more bold in our demands as well, because I think community organisations can often be perceived as being a little bit amateur because they don't have the levels of investment that other businesses might have, and so they're constantly being asked to do things that other businesses would struggle to do in terms of investment in ICT infrastructure, investment in management. There are a lot of reasons or a lot of ways in which we've been underinvested in. But I also think it's by refusing to be reliant on handouts as well, because I think as time goes on, I become much less interested in charity, because charity is kind of like the crumbs off somebody's tables, and much more interested in resilience and solidarity. So I think by developing things like the asset base that Lisa talked about and making sure that we are creating our own resources, Agnes from Galson Trust really inspired me when she was talking about some of the funds that Galson have been able to deliver with the revenue from some of their assets has meant that they've came as an equal partner to the table as well. And so I think when you're generating some of your own revenue, it puts you in a very different position. So I think we have to continue to step up to the plate, and we have to make a lot of noise about what's being done just now and engage effectively with the different stakeholders, because I think ears are opened, at least at a local government level here in Glasgow, because of the way in which local authorities have been paralysed by the crisis, because they're slow to react. They're not, agile organisations, and they realise that actually they need to work in partnership. So I think continuing to do what we're doing, shouting about it, and being really bold in our ambitions and our demands as well, and not selling ourselves short.
Okay, that's great, Martin. So Lisa, can I ask you about what your thoughts are on that subject?
No, I think Martin has said it all, really. I think it's critical to build relationships with other organisations and public sector in particular. We've spent a lot of time over the past couple of years working alongside public sector to try and get to a point where things are much more community-led as opposed to being public sector-led. And I think you're quite right as well, Martin, in that there has been a bit of a paralysis and a slower response than what the communities have been able to do in this current situation. And I think that will bode really well for us in that we've mobilised really quickly, we've been able to respond positively, and I think the critical point that you mentioned as well is that whilst we have to be bold and we have to talk about what we've done, I think we also have to be very clear about what we need to continue to deliver these things and not be left holding babies that we're currently holding.
Thanks, Lisa, that's great. We have a question from Sally Reynolds asking, could you expand on the funding you've received for supporting your community response? So if you want to go first, Lisa.
Yeah, sure. Well, until this point, none. We've applied for the community support fund, I think it is, through Highlands and Islands Enterprise, and we just found out yesterday that we've had a letter of offer for that. So it's quite a small fund. It's just £9,400 we've been awarded. So that is enough just now to do us for a couple of months to cover some of the activity that we're currently covering. And of course, but we're so heavily reliant on volunteers to be able to deliver much of what we are delivering. I think the other funding that we would be looking at drawing in is really through supporting other organisations to ensure they access what they can. But for the actual response, it's quite small amounts so far.
Okay, can I ask the same of you, Martin?
Yeah, so we've been in quite a fortunate position when it came to funding. We already had revenue funding to see us through the building transition. And so what we said was that we would spend that money first and try and figure out where it was coming from later. And we've been relatively successful in that approach. So some of the funding that we had already in place was through the Health and Social Care Partnership. And that was for our support workers who were in the cafe. And so we were able just to put them straight to being on the phone rather than around the table. We also had some funding which was around volunteering, and again we were able just to bring that in as well. We had an Investing in Communities application that was due to start, or that had been approved at the tail end of last year, and that had started off, and that's allowed us to bring in a full-time cafe manager, and so they are now in charge of the delivery of the food and the grocery boxes. And so, you know, half of the funding was just through using the existing funds that we had, and then we were able to bring in some of the small quick pots from Foundation Scotland for a couple of £1,000, 500 quid from Community Land Scotland, and a few of these other smaller pots. And I think what should be coming into the bank account tomorrow is the money that will allow us to continue going with the food boxes, which came through the Support and Communities Fund from the Scottish Government. So we were approached by the Big Lottery as being a community anchor organisation and invited to apply for funds from the Support and Communities Fund, and actually we asked for 100,000, and we were able to get that, and the first instalment of that's coming in tomorrow. But the vast majority of that is not for us. The vast majority of that is, I think 80,000 of that is for the other organisations within the community who've got quite extensive lists of the people that they're supporting. So what we were able to do is, as a community anchor organisation with a bit of a trusted status with funders, we were able to ask on behalf of groups who we knew were already supporting. In the case of one group, which is actually a completely volunteer-led group of folks who have experience of the asylum system themselves and have a support list of around 300 people who are not engaging with a lot of the other more structured institutions and who are currently receiving support of around £35 a week, which is a struggle for folks at the best of times. But at the moment, trying to make £35 a week go quite far is quite difficult. So we were able to access around £40,000 in support for them, which will almost entirely go in providing fortnightly food boxes and mobile credit top up to people as well. So a combination of being able to use the existing funds that we had and not worrying too much about, drawing on other people's funds, with the idea that we would find some more sustainable funding in the long run, taking some of the small pots that were available quickly with the idea that we would figure out how to spend them properly later on, and then trying to tie in some of the more structured funds, but doing that in partnership with other organisations who we knew weren't going to be in a position to be able to apply for funding themselves.
Okay, Martin, a similar question, or along the similar lines, from Elaine Gibb asking, were your own enterprising income generation activities and plans impacted, and has your kind of response to the crisis meant increased cost for your organisation?
For us, a lot of our revenue generation was on hold because our building was shut for the renovation that was supposed to start a couple of weeks ago. So we had 12 months of transitional revenue funding already secured. And so that meant that we didn't have to spend any time thinking about how do we continue to support our organisation during this time. So recognising again that we are really privileged to be in that position, and we're very fortunate. I think we've kind of kicked that can a little bit down the road, and so we'll have to try and understand what that means for next year. But our thoughts were, next year will come. We have to respond to this immediate 3 months. And in terms of additional costs, we didn't have a lot of costs at the moment because our buildings were closed. And so we have got additional costs, but that's because we've been able to expand our staff team due to bringing in some additional funding. So we've probably got, an equivalent extra 2 or 3 full-time staff at the minute, compared to where we were at last month. Some of that being planned, and some of that, redeploying funds that were supposed to be used for other things. And so I think it will impact on community organisations, but that's not the position we're in at the moment.
Can I ask the same question of you, Lisa? What impact has it had on your trading activities?
Not a huge impact really. Our main source of income is from our turbines, and thankfully they continue to operate. There have been some issues around contracts and so on, though, and things being a little bit slower to move than perhaps they would normally. So it doesn't come without its challenges, even that side of things. I guess from an activity sort of perspective, we normally do holiday clubs over Easter and things like that for children, and we weren't able to run those, but we've just accepted that these are not going to happen. They're very small income streams for us, and I think we just have accepted they're not happening, and we're looking at doing more things online anyway for just now, and we'll plan hopefully for summer or autumn activities to continue. But yeah, not a huge impact, to be honest.
Thanks, Lisa. It's just worth saying from a Community Land Scotland perspective that some of our members haven't been impacted. I think the ones that have been really struggling are the ones that are where most of their income generation comes from tourism, and that's something that's been quite hard for them to deal with. So there's a kind of variety of impacts across the community land sector. I've got another question for you, Lisa. When you talk about the need to give the community the resources to decide themselves, do you mean you as a trust giving them the freedom, i.e. the community, or do you mean that you as a community trust need to be given the funding and freedom to operate?
A little bit of both. I think that I don't want to appear very negative here, but I think quite a lot of the time, because of our geography and the fact we're an island, funding streams will come in and they'll be Western Isles wide, and the same solutions don't often work for Stornoway as they do for the more rural parts of the Western Isles. So I think sometimes there is that need to allow the trust the opportunity to have some freedom around how things operate in our area, and in turn we would then be able to work directly with community at the grassroots level to ensure that there are solutions in place for individual townships or areas within the estate. So I think, yeah, more improved true collaborative working is required.
Okay, thanks. I've got a question from Gillian Ferguson. I'll come to you first again, Lisa. Were there things you wanted to do previously but barriers or rules or regulations were in the way? And how have you worked around these, for example, delivering prescriptions?
Yeah, delivering prescriptions was never something that I think we had on our list of things that we wanted to do, but it's a really good example, actually. I think, yes, it's interesting that we risk assessed the delivery of prescriptions, and we can tolerate what came out of our risk assessment from that, and we can see the outcome from what we've the action that we've taken there. Another example of that has been where local authority in another part of the island has perhaps been asked to deliver a prescription, and they've thought, well, it'd be really good, we can just replicate what the communities are doing, and we'll get a community volunteer to do it. And then it was highlighted that that was too high risk because we don't know what's in a prescription bag. So that's the difference. Communities can tolerate some of the risks. They can risk assess and tolerate, whereas public sector sometimes can't tolerate the risk that's involved, and that stops something happening. So I think, yes, there are always going to be the sort of bureaucracy and rules and barriers around these things. And again, why I think it needs to come, some of these things need to be resourced at a grassroots level and not at a more centralised level, even if it is centralised to just 10 miles up the road. Sometimes it needs to be within districts.
Okay, thanks, Lisa. I think one of the lessons we've learned from this crisis is the ability of community organisations to manage and tolerate risks. So it's quite interesting to see how that's going to play out. So I'm going to ask the same question to Martin, if there's anything that they've been able to do that they might not have been able to do normally.
I think, just before answering that question, I think there's something really important that Lisa shared there as well, which is that larger institutions need to have more solid or less flexible processes and procedures because they're so large, whereas smaller organisations can be more agile, and that's one of the reasons why they're able to tolerate higher levels of risk, because they're able to have more connected levels of oversight to understand that risk a little bit better, whereas that's much more difficult. But I think there's also something there, coming back to that other question about what resources do you need, what funding freedom do you need. The idea that community organisations will be able to understand risk, be able to understand what it means to have a diverse asset base, to have diverse streams of income, that's all something that can only come with the right investment in the management of community organisations as well. And so often, because there are scarce resources and so much demand, then funders can get trapped in a poverty mentality cycle as well, where they're kind of expecting, or they're living hand to mouth, so they just want outcomes now. They just want grain now. They don't want to be able to spend some of the grain on planting for next year. They don't want to be able to spend some of the grain on educating the people that are going to be delivering these solutions, and that's understandable. But we need to really get rid of this poverty cycle and break the poverty trap that community organisations are in because of decades of underinvestment, whilst recognising that there are real reasons why that's happened, and not approaching the funders in a spirit of partnership as well, and trying to understand where they're coming from rather than just throwing stones at them and saying, well, why haven't you done X or Y or Z? But I think in terms of what we've been able to do is it's all about reach within our community. There's no way we would have had 100 volunteers from the neighbourhood signing up if it wasn't for this situation. There's no way that we would have been so quickly able to identify and assess the need and the risk and the issues within our community. So this is sort of turbocharged everything that we wanted to do and brought it forward at a much greater pace. I think then coming back to the idea of risk, one of the interesting things is that hunger and that isolation within this urban context existed before this situation. What's changed now is the ability for community organisations to be able to identify it, and politically what's changed is the tolerance levels for it to be able to be ignored. because on a political level, in terms of what the general wider population would demand from their politicians, or what the general wider population would be willing to tolerate, then actually that tolerance levels are a lot far lower than it has been in the past. So the idea just now that people would be left abandoned is much more scary for everybody, because everybody feels being abandoned at the moment. One of the bigger challenges that we're going to face is, what are we going to do when this immediate crisis finishes? Are we going to be expected just to ignore everybody that we're now in contact with? Because I think on a psychological level, that's not going to be possible for the staff or the volunteers of these community organisations. So I think there's some interesting questions there about funding and resources going forward, and what we're going to do coming out of this. And I think one of the most difficult things to do at the moment is to raise our eyes up and think about, well, what happens next? What happens in the journey out of this? Because actually we don't know where this journey's taking us, and so trying to imagine the journey out of it's quite difficult at the moment. But I think it's something that we have to be aware of and start thinking about just now, because this need's not going to stop. You know, to a certain extent, resources, connections have never been easier to make than they are at the moment, because there's need everywhere and everybody needs to connect with others. But what's going to happen after this? How are we going to continue to meet these challenges that we're much more aware of?
Okay, thanks, Martin. Now, you might find this one a bit difficult to answer because I know you're operating out of a temporary building, but how do you think the physical distancing requirements will impact your organisation's ability to work?
I think for us, it's definitely a question that's in the back of my mind, because it's at what point do we start to go back into a physical space rather than the kind of distance space that we're in at the moment. I think it's the same. It's going to be the same for everybody, no matter what kind of enterprise they're in, because they could tell you right now, okay, everybody can go back to bars and restaurants. But I think most of the people that I know wouldn't be for going in and sitting in close proximity with so many people at the moment. And so I think how people respond to this is going to be interesting, and I don't think we can answer that question yet, because we don't know, what the situation is going to be. But I think what might be the most difficult time is when there's the possibility to start doing things in person again. And there's a definite need for some of the folks that have been most socially isolated to try and get them out of that social isolation. But at the same time, there's going to be a large percentage of the population, and that might also include your staff and your volunteers, who are going to be really reticent. And so at the minute, it's relatively easy because everything's done at distance. What's going to be potentially much more challenging is when we get into this mixed situation of, we're being told that we probably can start to come back in, but we need to be careful. But now we're trying to operate in the online and the distance space, as well as potentially operating in the physical space at a time where maybe the resources will start to dry up, and they won't be being put behind community organisations in the way that they are just now. So I don't have an answer to that question, other than it's going to be really challenging.
And can I ask the same question of you, Lisa? How are you going to cope with the physical distancing requirements?
Well, I think Martin's probably covered it really well. I think there's definitely a transition there that we need to be mindful of. I think what you said, Martin, is critical as well. I mean, we need to think about legacy, and we need to think about how we cope with the things that we're currently doing, and how we continue those, and in what form we continue those beyond our current situation, where there is support and understanding, and we can't leave people in a situation whereby they've had lots of support and been able to tap in without any sort of shame as well. They've been able to, because they're in the same situation as everybody around them. And I think that's been a really positive thing of the crisis as well, is that it has put us much more on an even playing field. And like you say as well about people are isolated, people are always isolated, but right now it's unacceptable, and we're dealing with everybody, so it's much easier to do so. And I think we have to look for ways and look for projects that allow us to continue with that. I've got a member of staff right now working on a growing project, and I see that as being one that's very much about the social recovery and aiding people to come together and focus on some positives. And I think the growing side of that, the sort of therapeutic side of that, is all really important. So I'm really hopeful we can get funding and use some of these projects as sort of focus points beyond the current situation.
Okay, thanks, Lisa. We've talked a bit about what our hopes are for how this will change society in the future, but I have a question from Rona Campbell. How do you think it will impact on your organisation in terms of the way you operate? Is there anything you're going to do differently as a result of having been through the crisis?
Well, I think, yeah, without a doubt. I mean, I don't think any of us can come through this, and it would be pretty sad, I think, if we did come through this and didn't have a good look at how we operate and how we engage, and as a society, just how we are and how we consume, and how we manage things. So I think there will be large changes. I think really for us as an organisation, we've come through a crisis before last year, and for us in many ways that felt much more traumatic because it was directly on us. So I think this way I feel like we're in a much better supporting type role. So I hope that that crisis has provided us with resilience that has allowed us to be much more supportive in this current crisis. So I think, yeah, there will be changes, but maybe not massive ones as an organisation.
Thanks, Lisa. Can I ask the same for you, Martin?
I think to a certain extent more resolute, you know, in their beliefs, and willing to do what's necessary in order to enact them. So we always knew that actually, you know, we wanted to the different strands of our work to generate as much of their own income as possible and be as enterprising as possible when it comes to the solutions. We know that individuals and individual organisations are absolutely unable to tackle the challenges that we face as communities and as a society just now, and that we need to work in partnership, and that's even more evident than it has been. I think that we believe that it's by bringing people with the same aims together, but who come from very different backgrounds with different tool sets and different ways of approaching things, that we're best able to tackle those challenges. So I think maybe some of the activities might change, but I think the values of the organisation and what it is we seek to do will just be much more entrenched within ourselves and what we're going to do. And I hope the biggest changes is that the amount of connections and partnerships and that we're able to share with folks as well. I think from our point of view, what we realise is that the status quo that's probably not coming back isn't something that we want to go back to anyway. So, you know, we're not interested in some sort of form of recovery. What we're interested in is some form of transition to what we feel was already needed in the direction of travel. So I think the trends that were emerging before this have only been accelerated. So in our sense, you know, everything might be different now, but nothing's changed.
Okay, we have one last nicely timed question, given it's 5 to 12. Are there any specific online technologies you've used that you'd recommend? For example, you, Martin, how do you run your cafe connections online?
CRM, I think, is something that we always knew. So that's a client relationship or constituent relationship manager. We've been really lucky that our new cafe manager, Lindsay, has come on and hit the ground running in a lot of different ways. But we always knew that things like a CRM were something that could help what we do. And so, as well as, you know, the kind of online platforms, I think things like online project management tools and databases are something, again, you know, no business could operate without them, but often third sector organisations, you know, if you were to put into a funding application, you know, that you wanted £20,000 to be able to upgrade your online technology, then in your infrastructure, that probably would get quite short shrift. But, you know, we have always banged on about the need for that investment and the infrastructure behind community organisations, and that's something that we're even more convinced of now. And so I would say databases and online, you know, a CRM has probably been the biggest game changer, because trying to do all this with a spreadsheet, which is, you know, essentially a digital abacus and a bit of chalk, is just not acceptable.
Okay, thanks, Martin. And Lisa, is there any online technologies that you've used at Galson Estate?
I think we probably are not using anything more exciting than anyone else. I mean, we have all our files are online, And I think the really fortunate bit for us as an organisation was, you know, some of us worked from home on a regular basis anyway, so the transition to staff being at home was really fairly easy. I think what's made it really good for us though was making use of Zoom, which we didn't do before, and now we use it every day for a staff meeting. We have a coffee break every day. We've used it for a board meeting last month and had everyone sign in that way. So I can definitely see that, you know, even that will allow more people to engage even as an organisation with things too. So yeah, it's been quite positive.
Thanks, Lisa. Well, I think that was a really good discussion. I want to say a big thank you to our panellists for their interesting presentations, and thanks to our audience for coming up with some really interesting questions and getting some good chat going. We've recorded the webinar, so we'll be making that available, and we'll also be gathering case studies from our members as well, which will be available on our website. So thanks to everyone for taking part. I think it's been really interesting, and have a great day and keep safe. Thank you.